where early American architects were trained. This is another terracotta-clad building. Now it's beige. It's with a different style of Beaux-Art. And it was designed in 1926 by the architect Javert and Dinkelberg. Those of you familiar with the Flatiron Building in New York City, Dinkelberg designed that in 1904, very early in his career. And the building has a unique feature. It had an elevator for cars. It was intended to be a place for jewelers to have their shops. So a jeweler could drive his car into the elevator, go up to the floor where his shop was located, park the car, safely take the gems to the shops. Unfortunately, the cars kept getting bigger and bigger, and by 1940, they were too big for the elevator. The building was also designed in the 1920s, a very silly period of American history because you couldn't legally buy alcohol. What city are we in? You could always buy a drink in Chicago. You just needed to know where. Way up at the top of that big dome, that was one of the places, the Stratosphere Lounge. Now, if you look to your left, you'll see this walkway along the south side of the river. This is our Central Park. We call it the Riverwalk, and it's become incredibly successful in Chicago. But if you could close your eyes for a minute, think back to 1890s, 30,000 commercial vessels docked just on the south side of the river. The grain elevators, the flour mills, the lumber yards, the lumber mills, factories, warehouses, everything was along that south side. By the 1960s, those activities had moved elsewhere, and this was abandoned. But it was owned by the city. And two of our mayors, Richard M. Daley, son of the first Mayor Daley, and his successor, Rahm Emanuel, had a vision. We should use this space as our Central Park. First thing they did is they went to their friends in Washington, D.C., and they had the Congress adopt a law to allow the river, the edge, to be pushed out 25 feet, about 8 meters. And with that additional width, you can now build the walkways underneath the bridges. That's really the key to the success of the Riverwalk. You can walk 1.25 miles, 2 kilometers, unimpeded from Lakeshore Drive to where the river separates. Every block has a different activity. Carol Ross Barney and Associates, Chicago architects, designed the various blocks. The landscaping by the Boston architects Sasaki and Associates. This whole project was financed with $100 million in municipal bonds. And believe it or not, for a City of Chicago project, the bonds were repaid within 10 years because this project was so successful. And the revenue, the rental revenue from the various occupants here generated enough funds to pay those bonds. Coming up on your left, there's a block that looks like a theater. This is the theater block. If you let your eyes walk to the top, you'll see a building that's very tall that draws your eye upward. This is our first Art Deco building, 1930 design by Holliver and Ruth. Art Deco was a modern style for when the building was built. It didn't look back to styles in Europe and Greece and Rome and so forth. It looked for the here and now. Not a lot of decoration on the outside of these buildings. The emphasis is to draw your eye up through the interplay of the dark panels and the glass, the ribbons of windows. We'll talk a lot more about Art Deco because we have quite a few of those buildings on our tour today. Art Deco, by the way, is largely used, or was, in New York and in Chicago between the end of World War I and the beginning of World War II, the two cities with the then tall buildings in the United States. Let's go back to that Fidelity Label building for a minute. I told you that 1,000 plus of that style were built around the world in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Less is more. Well, by the end of the 70s, less had become a bore. And so we start to get a reaction against that style, what we now call postmodern. And in postmodern, what the architects try to do is they try to make the buildings relate to where they're sited or to give them some kind of historical reference. Now, the newer buildings are very, very large. It's hard to make them look like their neighboring buildings, so more often than not, it's done through symbolism and siding. Coming up on your left, you're going to see a rounded green facade building. And the reason it's rounded is because it's on a part of the river that is curved. Cone Pedersen Fox from New York designed this in 1983. They also made the glass two tones of green, symbolic of the water in our river. On a nice sunny day like today, it's the light green panels that are symbolic of the water. And this building has a three-part organization. Louis Sullivan, one of the earliest skyscraper architects, had a concept for what the building should look like. The form should follow the function. Well, at the base of the building are the mechanical systems, and so those floors are covered in granite. Then you have the rental space up above, that's the two-tone green, and way at the top you'll see cutouts, symbolic bridges, because there's so many bridges in this part of town. But the aspect of this building that says to me, I'm part of Chicago, is the way that that glass facade reflects the buildings in this neighborhood. It's almost like an impressionist painting. Now, in a couple of minutes, we're going to turn right, go up the north branch of the river, but directly ahead of us, you're going to see a newer building with a big parabolic arch. This is River Point 2017, designed by Picard Chilton. And the engineers here are Magnus and Clemency. As we get into the newer buildings, I'm going to talk a lot about the engineers, because the engineering is as important as the architectural design. The red sculpture you see in front is called Constellation, and believe it or not, it was designed by Salvatore Calatrava, far more well known as an architect than an artist. And the white wall you see at the base of the building with the portholes, there are 6 railroad tracks that run through that. The portholes are exhaust fans for the trains. Now, the engineers had a problem in making that building stand up on that site. Besides the railroad tracks at the base, under the railroad tracks is a tunnel for the Blue Line subway. And under that tunnel is a massive stormwater retention tunnel. The engineers had to figure out how to support the building around all those underground obstacles, and the parabolic arch is part of the solution. This is a LEED Gold building, Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, one of the ways we measure sustainability. Walking distance to the 2 major commuter train stations, as well as an elevated train station. All the lights are on sensors, so an empty office has no lights on. All the water fixtures are low usage, and the rainwater is captured to water the plants on the new park that was built on top of the train tunnel. The oldest building on our tour coming up on your left is the salmon-colored building, Fulton House Condominiums. Began its life in 1898 as a cold storage facility designed by Frank Abbott. So successful in that function, it was doubled in size 10 years later. But by the 1960s, it had been abandoned. A local architect in Chicago, Harry Weiss, after visiting his daughters who lived in loft apartments in old industrial buildings in New York City, came back to Chicago and said, you know what, we've got a lot of these abandoned buildings, we can do the same thing here. So acting as architect and developer, first thing, it took him 6 months to thaw out the walls, then required 500 trucks to remove all the cork and horsehair insulation before they could punch the windows and balconies through walls that were over 4 feet, over 1 meter in thickness. 1981, when this was done, the river was kind of a cesspool, but the project was still successful. Harry also designed these cottages in 1988 because he was an avid sailor. He used triangles and portholes as symbolic of sailing. 4 families shared his vision, bought these units. Only one has sold in those 40 years, and that unit sold in 2016 within a week for over $2 million. Now on your right, you're going to see a large industrial building. This is the East Bank Club, one of the largest private in-town clubs in the United States. When it was finished in 1979, after being designed by Gordon and Levin, the river was a cesspool. No need for windows to look at the river, no need for a river walk. But 10 years later, when the tennis barns were designed by Gellert Brand for the roof of the building, the river had begun a renaissance that continues to this day. Shoreline was bumped out for a river walk. Windows were added to the west facade. Now I'm going to talk a lot about river walks, but they're a very important element of the redevelopment of Chicago. And on your left is Kinsey Park. 30 years ago, this was the railroad yard for the Chicago-Milwaukee Railroad. When that company went bankrupt, developers bought the property and built a new city within the city. And about the same time, the second Mayor Daley had the city council do what his father had done. Use the zoning ordinance to influence what got built. In his case, he had a river edge ordinance adopted that required a 30-foot, about a 9-meter river walk all along the river for new construction and redeveloped buildings. And if your activity along the river was residential, you had to have outdoor living space. It could be a patio, a balcony, or a roof deck. The condos at Kinsey Park, designed by Papa George Haynes in 2002, they have all 3 of those outdoor living spaces. Now, I'm sure that most of you have seen buildings built before 1850. And if you think about what are the common features, they're short, usually 4 to 6 stories in height at most. They're built out of brick or stone, or both. And they have small doors and windows. That's because the walls are what hold up the building, what's called masonry load-bearing construction. A Chicago engineer who had designed many, many bridges for the Union Army during the Civil War, after that war came back to Chicago. And he spent 20 years taking these horizontal steel structures and trying to make them vertical. And when he succeeded at the end of the 1880s, we get the framework for what today we call a skyscraper. And if you look off to your right, you're going to see a white steel frame building with green windows. This is one of the good examples of how that steel frame works in a vertical configuration. This is Erie on the Park by Lucien Lagrange. And the people who live in that building, they overlook a little pocket park called the Aaron Montgomery Ward Park. Many of you may be familiar with Montgomery Ward and the retail business that used to have that name. Well, Ward is known in Chicago for 2 very important things. First, one of his early offices was on Michigan Avenue in Madison, overlooking what is now Grant Park. And anytime somebody wanted to build an industrial or commercial building on the east side of Michigan Avenue, he went to court to stop them. His argument was that when the federal government platted this part of the Northwest Territories, it provided that the lakeshore should always be for the public use. And finally, after many lawsuits at his expense, in 1911, the Illinois Supreme Court said, Mr. Ward is correct. All this lakefront is supposed to be for public use. So Chicago is really a blessed city. We have 31 miles of land along the lakefront inside the city limits. Only 6 are privately owned. All the rest is available to the public. The other thing, of course, that he's well known for is he was the Jeff Bezos and the Sam Walton of the 19th century. He first started working for Marshall Field and Company, went out into the farmland to sell products, quickly realizing those people could not buy the range of goods that city dwellers had available. So he started his own business. And it was successful for 2 revolutionary ideas. First, he had artists draw a picture of his goods, and he mailed those pictures around the country so people could see what they had available. Eventually, those became photographs. The early catalogs were only a few pages. By 1900, 1,000 pages, the wish book. And the second thing he did is after people mailed him an order with a check, he delivered their goods directly to their front door using the U.S. Postal Service. You think that'll ever catch on? We're going to see 3 buildings used in the Ward's business. Coming up now on your right, the beige building with the hanging balconies was an office building. Art Deco style, 1930 design by Willis McCauley, an employee of the Ward's business. When Ward's went bankrupt, condo developers hired Fitzgerald and Associates to convert it to residences. Because of the river edge ordinance, they had to cut out the first floor for a riverwalk, and they had to hang balconies on the outside. Because we're up close to an Art Deco building, you can see how minimal the decoration is in that style of building, just these little chocolate medallions. In a moment, we're going to pass under the Chicago Avenue Bridge, which, by the way, you should know is going to be closed until December of 2026. It's being completely rebuilt to serve the casino that I'll talk about in a few minutes. On your right now is the warehouse building for Ward's, 1905 to 1908, designed by Schmidt, Garden, and Martin. It's a prairie-style building. You see how that brickwork cuts through the vertical reinforced concrete columns? It draws your eye to side, not up and down like the Art Deco building. And these architects, were friends of Frank Lloyd Wright and Louis Sullivan, and so they pay respect to their friends through symbolism. The shields that you see are very similar to Frank Lloyd Wright designs, and the swirly chocolate-covered panels are very much like Louis Sullivan designs. And again, this building was redeveloped, so they had to cut away a riverwalk along the base. The building was the largest reinforced concrete building in the U.S. when it was finished. It was so big that the teenagers who were the order pickers did their jobs on roller skates. Now, looking upriver off to the right, this is the North River Redevelopment District. Over the next 10 plus years, millions of square feet of new housing, restaurants, stores, offices, parks, and entertainment venues will be built here, creating a new city within the city. Most people today don't want to live 25 miles from downtown like I do. I used to commute an hour each way when I worked in the city. Now they want to live to where they can bicycle or walk